Billionaire humiliated his wife in court until her mother walked in and changed everything, the public execution. The silence in the Superior Court of Manhattan was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and smelled of lemon polish and old money. The room was a cavern of intimidation, lined with rich mahogany paneling that seemed to absorb the light, casting long shadows over the gallery. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, piercing through the high-arched windows, illuminating the divide between the two worlds sitting at the front of the room. On the right side, the table was crowded. 3 high-priced attorneys in Italian silk suits tapped on tablets and whispered strategies. In the center of that power block sat Marcus Sterling. At 32, Marcus was the picture of modern royalty. He wore a custom-tailored navy blue pinstripe suit that hugged his broad, muscular frame perfectly. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar just enough to show a hint of confidence, and a heavy gold watch, worth more than most people's homes, glinted on his wrist every time he moved. He looked comfortable, bored even, as if this trial were merely a tedious board meeting he was eager to conclude. On the left side, the table was desolate. There were no teams of lawyers, only a court-appointed public defender who looked overworked and already defeated. And next to him sat Maya Sterling. Maya did not look like the wife of a billionaire technology mogul. She looked like a ghost. She wore a simple beige button-down blouse that had seen better days, the fabric slightly worn at the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, exposing a face devoid of makeup but etched with a profound, aching sadness. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at the judge. She stared at her hands, which were folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "Mr. Sterling," the judge's voice cut through the air. Judge Vivian Banks was a stern woman with steel-grey eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics. "You may continue your statement regarding the division of assets." Marcus stood up. He didn't just stand. He unfolded himself with a predator's grace. He walked to the center of the floor, turning his back to the judge for a moment to smile at the packed gallery. The press was there. The socialites were there. He loved an audience. "Thank you, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice a smooth, rich baritone that had charmed investors out of millions. He turned slowly, locking his eyes on Maya. "The truth is simple. I built Sterling Dynamics from the ground up. I worked 18-hour days. I took the risks. I bled for that company." He took a step toward Maya, his expression shifting from professional to mocking. "And while I was building an empire, what was my wife doing?" Marcus let out a short, cruel laugh. He pointed a manicured finger directly at her face. "She was clipping coupons. She was embarrassing me at galas by wearing that." He gestured vaguely at her beige blouse with disgusted theatricality. "I tried to elevate her. I tried to give her the world. But you can't put a diamond on a pebble and expect it to shine." A ripple of shock went through the courtroom, but Marcus rode the wave. "She refused to hire staff because she wanted to save money," Marcus continued, pacing now, his energy manic and aggressive. "I'm closing billion-dollar deals, and I come home to find my wife scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees because she didn't trust the cleaning service. It wasn't humility, Your Honor. It was a lack of vision. She is small. Her mind is small. She held me back." Maya flinched. The tears that had been brimming in her eyes finally spilled over, hot and silent, tracking down her cheeks. She remembered that day he was referencing. He had been sick with the flu, delirious with fever, and she had scrubbed the floors herself to keep the house sterile because the agency hadn't sent anyone in time. She had made him soup from scratch. She had cooled his forehead with damp cloths. "She doesn't deserve half," Marcus boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "She doesn't deserve 10%. She was a placeholder, a mistake I made before I understood my own worth." He leaned over the railing of the witness box, looking down at Maya as if she were an insect. "Look at her," he sneered, laughing again, a sharp barking sound that stripped Maya of her last shred of dignity. She's crying. That's her only skill, crying and clinging. She wants alimony? For what? For existing in the same house as greatness? Judge Banks tapped her gavel, her face unreadable. Mr. Sterling, refrain from personal attacks. Stick to the financial contributions. That's the point, Judge. Marcus threw his hands up, flashing the gold watch again. There were no contributions. She brought nothing to this marriage but debt and a rural mindset that she couldn't shake off. I am a man of the future. She is an anchor to a mediocre past. Maya felt a sob rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. It tasted like bile. She could feel the eyes of the crowd burning into her back. They were whispering, "Look at him, so powerful, so handsome. Look at her, so plain, so pathetic." The humiliation was total. Marcus wasn't just divorcing her. He was publicly dismantling her humanity. He wanted to ensure that when she left this courtroom, she would be a pariah. He wanted to break her so thoroughly that she would never ask for a penny again. "I am requesting a summary judgment," Marcus's lead lawyer interjected smoothly, standing up. "Based on the pre-existing lack of financial contribution and the incompatibility of lifestyle demonstrated here, we offer a one-time settlement of $10,000, enough for a bus ticket back to wherever she came from." $10,000, the price of one of Marcus's suits. Maya finally looked up. Her eyes met Marcus's. There was no love left in his gaze, only a cold, triumphant malice. He winked at her, a subtle, imperceptible wink that said, "I win." The shadow of the past. The court recessed for an hour before the final ruling. The heavy wooden doors closed, sealing the courtroom, but the atmosphere inside remained thick with the residue of Marcus's cruelty. Maya sat alone on a bench in the hallway, her hands trembling as she held a styrofoam cup of lukewarm water. Her mind drifted, escaping the cold marble of the courthouse and retreating into the memories Marcus had so viciously twisted. 5 years ago. The image was vivid. It wasn't a mansion. It was a cramped, drafty one-bedroom apartment in Queens that smelled of mildew and burnt toast. Marcus hadn't been wearing custom suits then. He had been wearing a frayed hoodie, his eyes dark with exhaustion and panic. "I can't do it, Maya," he had cried, his head in his hands. The investors pulled out. "It's over. I'm a failure." He had been sobbing on the floor, surrounded by crumpled rejection letters. It was Maya who had knelt beside him. It was Maya who had taken his face in her hands. "You are not a failure," she had whispered, her voice fierce and steady. "You are a genius, Marcus. They just don't see it yet, but I do." The court hadn't heard that part. They hadn't heard about the 2 jobs Maya worked, waitressing at a diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then cleaning offices from 6 p.m. to midnight. Every dollar she earned went into the Sterling Fund. She paid for the server space. She paid for the patent filings. She paid for the electricity that kept his computer running while he coded into the pre-dawn hours. She ate ramen noodles and skipped meals so he could buy a decent suit for his pitch meetings. She walked to work in the rain to save bus fare, and she was happy. She was happy because she loved him. She believed in the us they were building. The transition had been slow, insidious, like a poison gas that you don't smell until you're already choking. When the first million came in, Marcus bought a Porsche. Maya suggested they pay off her student loans or buy a house for her mother. Marcus had laughed, patting her on the head. "Don't think so small, babe. We need to look the part." Then came the move to the penthouse, the staff, the parties. Maya tried to keep him grounded. She was the one who remembered his employees' birthdays. She was the one who sat with him when the stress of the IPO kept him awake, stroking his hair and singing the old gospel songs her mother had taught her. She was the magic behind the scenes, the warmth that made the cold house a home. But Marcus began to resent her for it. Her humility became a mirror that showed him his own arrogance, and he hated what he saw. So he smashed the mirror. He started criticizing her clothes. "You look like a maid," he would sneer when she wore jeans. He started locking his phone. He started coming home late, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. Then came the isolation. He fired the housekeeper she had finally agreed to hire, claiming Maya could handle it since she didn't work. He cut off her access to the joint accounts, giving her a household allowance like she was a child. He wanted her dependent. He wanted her weak. Back in the courtroom hallway, Maya took a sip of the water. It was hard to swallow. The public defender, a young man named Mr. Henderson who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, sat down next to her. He sighed, loosening his tie. "Look, Mrs. Sterling," he said gently, "I'm going to be honest with you. It doesn't look good. The judge seems swayed. He's painting a picture of you as a liability. We don't have access to the financial records to prove you funded the startup phase. He's buried everything in shell companies." "I know," Maya whispered. Her voice was raspy from crying. "If we accept the settlement," Henderson continued, looking at his shoes, "you can walk away today. It's insulting, I know. It's criminal. But if we fight and lose, you might end up with legal fees you can't pay. He's trying to bankrupt you." Maya closed her eyes. The injustice of it burned in her chest. It wasn't about the money, it was about the erasure of her life. He was stealing her past, her sacrifice, her love, and turning it into a joke for the tabloids. "I just wanted a family," she said softly. "I just wanted him to remember who we were." "He remembers," Henderson said grimly. "That's why he hates you. You remind him that he wasn't always a god." Suddenly the heavy doors of the courtroom opened. The bailiff stepped out. "All rise, court is back in session." Maya stood up. Her legs felt like lead. She smoothed the wrinkles of her beige blouse, the blouse she had bought at a thrift store because Marcus had cut off her credit card last month. She took a deep breath. She would go back in there. She would sit straight. She would let him throw his stones. She walked back into the arena. Marcus was already there, laughing with his lead attorney. He checked his reflection in his phone screen, adjusting his tie. As Maya passed him, he leaned in, his voice a low, venomous whisper only she could hear. "You should have taken the 10 grand, Maya. Now, I'm going to make sure you leave here with nothing but the clothes on your back. And honestly, even those look like they belong in the trash." He sat down, smug and untouchable. Judge Banks banged the gavel. "We will now proceed to the final arguments regarding the validity of the prenuptial arrangements and final asset distribution." The air in the room grew thin. The trap was set. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of the kill. He had won. There was no one left to fight for Maya. She was alone against an empire. Or so he thought. The fatal trap. The air in the courtroom shifted from tense to suffocating. Marcus's lead attorney, a man with a shark-like smile named Mr. Sterling Vance, no relation, simply a branding choice Marcus admired, stood up. He held a document in his hands, as if it were a holy scripture. It was a thick sheaf of papers, bound in a blue legal folder. "Your Honor," the attorney began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "we have heard Mrs. Sterling's pleas. We have heard the emotional outbursts, but the law deals in facts, not feelings. And the fact is, the distribution of assets was decided 3 years ago." He marched toward the bench and placed the folder before Judge Banks. "I present Exhibit C, the post-nuptial agreement, signed, notarized and witnessed on October 14th, 3 years ago." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Maya froze. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp physical pain radiating through her chest. October 14th. She remembered the date perfectly. It hadn't been a business meeting. It had been a night of terror. Marcus had come home, pale and shaking, claiming that a lawsuit from a rival developer was about to destroy everything. He had told her that they needed to shield the assets. He had wept in her lap, telling her that if she didn't sign these papers to technically separate their estates, the bad men would take their home, their savings, everything. "It's just a formality, Maya," he had promised, kissing her hands, his tears wetting her skin. "It's to protect us, to protect our future children. As soon as the lawsuit clears, we tear it up. Please, baby. Do this for me." She had signed it. She hadn't even read it. She had signed it because she loved him, and she couldn't bear to see him so afraid. "This document," the attorney continued, turning to face the gallery, "clearly states that in the event of a dissolution of marriage, Mrs. Sterling waives all rights to Sterling Dynamics, the real estate portfolio, and any future earnings of Mr. Sterling. In exchange, she agreed to a lump sum payout of $10,000. "That was for protection," Maya blurted out, standing up. Her legs were shaking so violently she had to grip the table. "He told me it was to save the company from a lawsuit. He promised it was temporary." "Order!" Judge Banks snapped, though her eyes scanned the document with a deepening frown. Marcus laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound of pure amusement. He leaned into his microphone. "Your Honor, my wife is confused. She has a vivid imagination. There was no lawsuit. I simply realized that her spending habits were becoming a liability. She signed it willingly. She read it. She is an adult, isn't she?" He looked at Maya with eyes that were void of any soul. "You wanted to be helpful, didn't you, Maya? You finally did something useful. You signed your exit papers." The cruelty was absolute. He hadn't just tricked her, he had weaponized her trust. He had banked on her love being greater than her suspicion, and he had been right. Mr. Henderson, Maya's public defender, looked at the document and slumped in his chair. "Mrs. Sterling," he whispered, defeated. "Is that your signature?" Maya looked at the projected image on the courtroom screen. Her handwriting, looped and careful, stared back at her. It was the signature of a woman who trusted her husband with her life. Now, it was her death warrant. "Yes," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Then I'm afraid," Judge Banks said, her voice heavy with resignation, "that this court has very little room to maneuver. The document appears legally sound. The terms are harsh, but binding." Marcus smirked, adjusting his silk tie. He looked at the press gallery, making sure the reporters were getting his good side. "Justice is served," he murmured loud enough for the front row to hear. "Gold diggers everywhere should take note." He turned his gaze back to Maya, his expression hardening into a look of utter disgust. "You thought you were a partner. You were a pet. And now I'm done feeding you." The room spun around Maya. The mahogany walls seemed to close in. She saw the future Marcus had designed for her: poverty, humiliation, the total erasure of the last 5 years of her life. She had given him her youth, her labor, her heart, and he had harvested it all and left her a husk. Judge Banks raised her gavel. "In light of the signed agreement, and absent any proof of coercion beyond the defendant's verbal claims, I am prepared to rule in favor of the plaintiff. Judgment will be entered as requested. Mr. Sterling retains full ownership of—" The gavel hovered in the air, seconds away from sealing Maya's fate. Marcus was already half standing, ready to button his jacket and walk out into his victorious new life. The matriarch's entrance boom. The sound was not a gavel. It was the heavy double oak doors at the back of the courtroom crashing open against the walls with the force of a thunderclap. The noise was so sudden, so violent, that the entire courtroom jumped. Judge Banks froze, her gavel suspended in mid-air. Marcus whipped his head around, annoyed by the interruption. The gallery murmured, heads turning in unison to see who dared to interrupt the final judgment. Standing in the doorway, framed by the bright light of the corridor, was a figure that commanded immediate, breathless silence. It was Eleanor Vance. But this was not the woman Marcus had described to his friends. the simple country mother who knitted blankets and lived in a shack. This woman was a titan. Eleanor stood 6 feet tall in heels, her posture regal and unyielding. She wore a bespoke, midnight navy Chanel business suit with gold buttons that caught the light like armor. Her hair, a striking silver grey, was cut in a sharp, modern bob that framed a face of formidable intelligence. Behind her stood 2 men in grey suits carrying thick leather briefcases, not lawyers, but corporate auditors. She stepped into the courtroom. The sound of her heels on the marble floor was rhythmic, deliberate, and loud. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a countdown. "Who is this?" Judge Banks demanded, though her voice lacked its usual bite. She, like everyone else, was struck by the woman's sheer presence. That's her mother," Marcus stammered. He stood up, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. My mother-in-law is interrupting court. Security, please remove her. She's probably lost." He turned to Eleanor, his face twisting into a condescending sneer. "Eleanor, did you get confused by the big city map? The bus station is 3 blocks down. This is a court of law, not a church bingo night." Eleanor didn't blink. She didn't break her stride. She walked past the gallery, past the press, and stopped directly in the center of the aisle, parallel to Marcus. She turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly calm. "Be quiet, boy," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it projected with the crystal clarity of a stage actor. "Adults are talking." Marcus's mouth snapped shut. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. Eleanor turned her attention to the bench. She adjusted her glasses, peering over the rim at the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I believe you were about to make a ruling based on incomplete and fraudulent information." "And who are you to make such a claim?" Judge Banks asked, intrigued despite herself. "I am Eleanor Vance," she stated. "I am submitting a motion to intervene as a third-party plaintiff with a material interest in the assets being discussed." Marcus scoffed loudly. "Material interest? She's a retired school cook from Georgia. She doesn't have a material interest in a pack of gum, let alone my company." Eleanor signaled to one of the men behind her. He stepped forward and placed a heavy briefcase on the defense table, right in front of a stunned Maya. "Maya, darling," Eleanor said, her voice softening for the first time as she looked at her daughter. "Wipe your face. You are a Vance. We do not cry in front of thieves." She turned back to Marcus, her gaze hardening into diamond. "You seem to be under the impression, Marcus, that you are a self-made man," Eleanor said, opening the briefcase with a sharp snap. "You believe that the angel investor who gave you your first $2 million, the blind trust that saved you when no bank would look at you, was some anonymous billionaire in Silicon Valley." Marcus froze. A cold bead of sweat trickled down his temple. That's confidential financial data." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "My data." She pulled out a document stamped with a golden seal and handed it to the bailiff to give to the judge. "That is the deed of trust for the Vance Venture Capital Group," Eleanor announced to the room. "The sole beneficiary of that trust is Maya Sterling. I am the trustee, and you, Marcus." She took a step closer to him, towering over his seated form. "You were never the owner of Sterling Dynamics. The initial capital agreement, which you signed without reading because you were too busy buying champagne, clearly states that the company remains the intellectual property of the trust until the principal is repaid with interest, which it hasn't been." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously. Marcus's lawyers were scrambling, pulling papers out of their briefcases, their faces pale. "That's a lie!" Marcus screamed, losing his composure completely. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "She's lying. She's a nobody. Look at her daughter. They are trash." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Banks shouted, banging her gavel. She was reading the document Eleanor had provided, her eyes widening behind her spectacles. I am not finished, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The agreement also has a morality clause. Section 4, paragraph 2. Any executive appointed by the trust, that's you, Marcus, can be terminated immediately for acts of gross moral turpitude, including public defamation of the beneficiary. Eleanor gestured to the courtroom around them. Humiliating your wife? The owner of the company? In open court? Eleanor smiled, but it was a smile that promised destruction. I'd say that counts. Marcus looked at his lawyers. Do something, he shrieked. Tell them she's crazy. Mr. Sue. Sterling Vance, the lead attorney, looked up from the document the judge had passed down. He looked at Marcus, then closed his laptop. I can't, Mr. Sterling, the lawyer said quietly. The seal is authentic. The signatures are yours. Technically, you're just an employee, and I think you've just been fired. The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to Marcus. The man who had entered the room as a king was now standing in the wreckage of his own ego, stripped naked by the truth. Eleanor walked over to Maya, who was staring at her mother in shock. Eleanor placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, anchoring her. Now, Eleanor said, looking at the judge, shall we discuss the severance package? I believe $10,000 is customary for low-level employees. The redemption and the new beginning. The silence in the courtroom was no longer heavy. It was electric. It vibrated with the kinetic energy of a total paradigm shift. The atmosphere had turned from a funeral for Maya's future into a gladiatorial arena where the lion had just realized the gate was open, and he was no longer the predator. Marcus Sterling stood frozen, his hand gripping the back of his mahogany chair so tightly that the leather creaked audibly. His face, usually a mask of bronzed perfection, was patchy and grey. He looked from the documents on the judge's bench to Eleanor Vance, and finally to Maya. He was trying to process the impossible mathematics of his new reality. This is insane, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. He turned to his lead attorney, Mr. Sterling Vance. Do something. Object. She's fabricating this. The lawyer, who had spent the last hour smugly destroying Maya's reputation, slowly began to pack his briefcase. He clicked his expensive pen shut and slid it into his pocket. I cannot object to a certified deed of trust, Mr. Sterling, the lawyer said, his voice devoid of the warmth he had feigned earlier. I bill $3,000 an hour. Based on what Ms. Vance has just presented, you currently have a net worth of negative $4 million. My firm does not work on credit. You work for me, Marcus screamed, saliva flying from his lips. The veneer of the sophisticated billionaire shattered completely, revealing the frightened, angry child beneath. Actually, Eleanor interrupted, her voice cool and smooth like polished stone, he works for Sterling Dynamics, and as the trustee representing the majority shareholder, my daughter, I am terminating the company's contract with his firm effective immediately. Eleanor looked at the lawyer. You may go. The lawyer didn't hesitate. He nodded respectfully to Eleanor, ignored Marcus entirely, and walked out of the courtroom. His two associates followed, leaving Marcus alone at the massive defense table. The visual isolation was striking. Judge Banks cleared her throat. She had finished reading the documents. She took off her glasses and looked at Marcus with a mixture of pity and professional disdain. Mr. Sterling, the judge began, her tone final, the evidence provided by the intervener is conclusive. The Sterling Dynamics Corporation and all assets purchased under its umbrella, including the marital home, the vehicles, and the investment portfolios, are the intellectual and physical property of the Vance Trust. She turned a page, her eyebrows raising slightly. Furthermore, the employment agreement you signed 5 years ago is quite specific. Clause 12B, termination for cause, results in the immediate forfeiture of all company perks, bonuses, and unvested stock options. You are hereby stripped of your title as CEO. Maya sat perfectly still, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched the man who had tormented her for years shrink before her eyes. It wasn't just that he was losing his money, he was losing his identity. Without the money, without the title, Marcus was nothing. He was a hollow shell. "You can't do this to me," Marcus pleaded, turning to the judge, tears of rage welling in his eyes. "I built this. I am the face of the company." "You were the mask," Eleanor corrected him. She walked around the table to stand next to Maya. "Maya was the heart. You were just the face we paid for. And frankly, the brand needs a rebrand." Eleanor reached into her briefcase and pulled out one final document. She slid it across the table toward Marcus. "What is this?" Marcus stared at the paper. "A counteroffer," Eleanor said. "You offered my daughter $10,000 and a bus ticket. I'm a fair woman, Marcus. I'm offering you a clean break. Sign this, admitting to your fraud and infidelity, and we will not press criminal charges for the embezzlement of company funds for your personal entertainment." Marcus looked at the paper. It was an admission of guilt. If he signed it, he would be free, but he would be destitute. If he didn't, Eleanor would send him to prison. "And," Eleanor added, her eyes flashing, "there is one more thing." She pointed a manicured finger at his chest. "The suit." Marcus blinked. "What?" "The navy blue pinstripe suit," Eleanor said calmly. "The receipt shows it was purchased with the company credit card last month. It is listed as a uniform expense. It is company property." A gasp went through the gallery. The humiliation was absolute. "You want me to take it off?" Marcus stammered, looking around at the reporters whose cameras were flashing wildly. "You can keep the shirt and trousers for decency," Eleanor said dismissively. "But the jacket, the tie, and that watch, those belong to Maya." Slowly, with trembling hands, Marcus unbuttoned the jacket. He took off the tie. He unclasped the heavy gold watch. He placed them in a pile on the table. Without the armor of his wealth, he looked smaller. His shoulders slumped. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a bitter, broken man. He signed the paper. "Get out," Eleanor said softly. Marcus looked at Maya one last time. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to apologize, but Maya turned her head away. She looked at her mother. She looked at the judge. She didn't offer him a single word. He wasn't worth the breath. Marcus Sterling turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The silence was deafening. He pushed open the heavy doors and disappeared into the corridor, alone. The aftermath. The scene outside the courthouse was chaotic. The press, having smelled blood in the water, swarmed the steps. But instead of the narrative Marcus had tried to spin, the billionaire shedding his dead weight, they were met with a new story. The miracle. Maya stepped out into the sunlight, shielding her eyes. For the first time in years, the sun didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a baptism. Eleanor stood beside her, a pillar of strength. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maya asked, her voice trembling as they walked toward the waiting black car, a car that Maya now realized she actually owned. "Why did you hide the money, Mom? Why let me struggle?" Eleanor stopped on the steps, oblivious to the flashing cameras. She took Maya's face in her hands. "Because, my love, money is a magnifier," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father left us that fortune when he died, but he made me promise something. He said, 'Elle, don't let our girl grow up thinking value comes from a checkbook. We wanted you to build your own character first.'" Eleanor wiped a tear from Maya's cheek. "When you met Marcus, I was worried. He was hungry, but in the wrong way. I set up the trust to test him. I wanted to see if he loved you or if he loved the safety net. When he was poor, he loved you. But as soon as I gave him the ladder, he kicked you down. I thought I was weak," Maya whispered. "I thought I failed him." "You carried him," Eleanor said firmly, "and today you dropped the weight. You aren't weak, Maya. You are the CEO of your own life now, and literally the CEO of Sterling Dynamics if you want the job." Maya looked at the crowd. She saw the young women looking at her with awe. She saw the reflection of herself in the car window, no longer the mouse Marcus had called her, but a survivor. She straightened her spine. She buttoned her beige cardigan not with shame, but with dignity. "I don't want to be CEO," Maya said, a small smile touching her lips. "Not yet. First, I want to go get a cheeseburger. And then, I want to fire the entire board of directors." Eleanor threw her head back and laughed, a rich, joyous sound that echoed down the street. "That's my girl. Lunch first, empire second." Epilogue. 5 years later. The office was located on the 40th floor, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The sign on the glass door no longer read Sterling Dynamics. It read Vance and Sterling Foundation. Maya sat at the head of the conference table. She was unrecognizable from the woman in the beige blouse. She wore a tailored white suit that radiated power and elegance. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders. She held a pen in one hand and a baby monitor in the other. "The Q3 reports look excellent," she said to the room full of executives. "But the community outreach program in the Bronx is underfunded. Divert 15% of the profits from the tech sector to the scholarship fund. I want it done by Monday." "Yes, Ms. Sterling," the board chorused. The meeting adjourned. As the executives filed out, Eleanor walked in. She moved slower now, using a cane, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She was carrying a toddler, a beautiful little boy with curly hair and bright, curious eyes. "He was trying to reorganize my filing cabinet," Eleanor chuckled, handing the boy to Maya. Maya kissed her son, Leo, on the forehead. "He takes after his grandmother." "Bossy." "He takes after his mother," Eleanor corrected, sitting down in the chair next to her. "Resilient." Maya looked out the window. Down on the street below, life moved on. She sometimes wondered about Marcus. She had heard rumors. He was working as a mid-level sales manager for a car dealership in New Jersey. He had tried to reach out once, sending a letter when the company made the Fortune 500 list. Maya hadn't even opened it. She had simply shredded it and continued playing with her son. She had found love again, real love, with a man who was a pediatric surgeon, a man who thought her scrubbing floors to save a business was the most heroic thing he had ever heard, a man who looked at her with reverence, not ownership. "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, watching her daughter gaze at the city. Maya looked down at the gold watch on her wrist, not the flashy man's watch Marcus had worn, but a delicate vintage piece her father had left her. She looked at her son, safe and loved. She looked at the empire she had rebuilt with kindness and integrity. "I'm not just happy, Mom," Maya said, smiling as she squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I'm free." The sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the office. The nightmare of the courtroom felt like a lifetime ago, a different story written about a different woman. Maya Sterling had not just survived the fall, she had learned how to fly. The end